Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the weekly news show that's so real. They're trying to figure out a way to get rid of us, but they haven't yet. We're back. We're actually back on YouTube this week after being temporarily, we hope, bumped, but we're working on a permanent fix. So thank you to everybody who helped us fundraise for new streaming software. We've got it, and hopefully, or I should say, inshallah, starting next week, we will be broadcasting live on various places, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're getting bigger and better even as they try to stop us. And our very special guest commentator this week, Helen Byniski, is a bit of an expert on this. Welcome, Helen. Great to have you.
Good to be here.
And your article, I thought, was fantastic. This is such perfect timing. So we move on to this next. Oh, first, remind all of our listeners to email us and get on our list so we can tell you where to find us, assuming they axe us again, which they very likely will. So please do email ffwn@NoLiesRadio.org and get on our list so we can tell you where to find us. All right, moving on. Helen, your article, The Sorcerer's Apprentice Effect, was really fantastic. It covers a whole lot of the topics we're going to talk about in today's show. Deplatforming, the Orwellian NewsGuard software that they're trying to implant like some kind of a virus into everybody's computers to tell us that don't believe anything you see on False Flag Weekly News, that sort of thing. So maybe you could quickly introduce yourself and the article.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for publishing it, by the way. And yeah, basically, the article is an overview of how this attempt to crack down, this really unprecedented attempt to crack down, both at the creator end and at the consumer end, by stopping the content from getting out and by stopping you from receiving the content, is basically a reaction to the idea that they've lost control of the narrative, which is why I call it the Sorcerer's Apprentice effect. After the Disney cartoon where Mickey Mouse, his boss falls asleep, he puts on the sorcerer's hat and starts working up a storm and magic that he doesn't really understand, falls asleep, the magic keeps going. He doesn't know how to put a stop to it because he knows all of the special words and talismanic things that you're supposed to do, but he doesn't understand the reasoning behind them. So when it starts going wrong, there's no way to troubleshoot. And I see that this is what's going on with the ruling class, basically in the US/NATO establishment, is that they've sort of lost control of the narrative. People are waking up to truths that they're not supposed to know about, and they don't really know how to put the cat back in the bag. So hence all of these software solutions, all of these legal solutions, especially in Europe. I go into a little bit of the really scary laws that are in the pipeline in the UK and France.
We'll talk about some of those.
Yeah, really, really scary stuff. I mean, this really unprecedented just attempts to just silence any sort of dissent. And yeah, and so basically it opens up the article with an examination of how this Venezuela coup with Juan Guaido was supposed to be an easy sort of easy win to raise morale for the troops on our way to Iran, but nope, didn't work. So it's just another finger in their eye, and they're really getting upset, and it's not going to be pretty. An empire scorned is never a nice thing to look at.
Yeah, they're not just losing control of the narrative, but they're losing control of the world. And of course, it's their control of the narrative that helps them stay in control of the world. And interestingly, it's and here's the article, by the way, at Veterans Today. Seems like the Zionist wing of the ruling neoliberal establishment is in the lead as far as going crazy with these censorship attempts. I mean, they're disproportionately represented in these various censorship pushbacks and initiatives. And let's move on to the war on Palestine to see why that might be. Maybe they're even more desperate because they're in an even more desperate situation. The neoliberal West is a small minority of the world, but it's been running the world for centuries, whereas the squatters in occupied Palestine are surrounded by about a billion people that don't accept the legitimacy of their genocidal enterprise. So the end might be nigh, not only for Netanyahu, but for Zionism itself. That might be why the Zionists are working so hard to shut down people telling the truth.
Well, so you can only pull the wool over people's eyes for so long, and because they are such a tiny percentage of the population, this attempt to basically control huge amounts of people via just having the better narrative is, I mean, it's very flimsy, and they realize this, and so just the slightest glimmer that they might be losing control is enough to send them into a panic. I mean, yeah, Netanyahu there.
Yeah. He's well, you never know where he might pull something out of his hat. We have 1 month to go until the national elections in Israel, and the Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit has announced his decision to indict Netanyahu. So maybe he'll end up running Israel from a prison cell, a criminal running a criminal state, that would be appropriate. But this Atlantic article says he likely won't be prime minister for very long. And I would tend to agree with that. What do you think, Helen?
I mean, unfortunately, I've just seen him whip out so many like pre-election invasions of Gaza to whip up support in his base. And I mean, for some reason, the people really seem to like him. I don't know why. I guess because he makes them feel like they're on the winning side, because he just paints the entire world as the enemy, and well, we have to all stick together. When I mean, even outside of Israel, I mean, there's less and less support every day in the U.S. Most Jews are not really identifying with Israel these days,
especially not with Bibi.
Yeah, especially not with Bibi. He's making more enemies than he's making friends. I think that his base of support is getting smaller and smaller. But I don't know who's the alternative. This Benny Gantz guy who's running on his ability to kill civilians in Palestine. I don't know.
Yeah, he's not this Gantz guy. He's not just Bibi light. He's Bibi super heavyweight. He's worse than Bibi.
There's no alternative. So I don't know if Bibi's going anywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe not. Well, Israel may not be right away, but they're on the way out. And we just had the UN essentially send a crimes against humanity dossier over to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The 183 Palestinians have been murdered since this Great March of Return began. Other 183 with live ammunition. They've intentionally shot children, intentionally shot people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs. They've intentionally shot journalists. This is all coming from the United Nations. So the world is starting to wake up to these crimes against humanity. And the U.S. is starting to wake up too. Let's move on to the wake-up call delivered by Ilhan Omar, a mild, slender, and not particularly fearsome-looking woman, but man, she's quite a fighter. She's a master of
a big mess. I like it.
Jiu-jitsu, right?
I like it.
She's using her opponent's overpowering financial force against them. She's the new Muhammad Ali, the undisputed master of the trope-a-dope. Trick your opponent into going crazy and swinging and pounding the crap out of you. So you just lay back against the ropes and take it.
And then prove your point. They prove your point 1,000 times over. I love it. Yeah. They're just shooting themselves in the foot with such velocity. It's amazing. I mean, she comes out and says, "Oh, well, the money is controlling the lawmakers," and then all the lawmakers from all sides, her own party, jumps all over her and says, "You must be silent." And it's like, wait, what? Didn't you guys just get finished saying that like all of the things that Ilhan Omar is are like we need more of these in our legislators? And wait, so okay, we know which one is more important to you guys.
And it's actually kind of interesting that a Muslim can get away with this. Of course, I'm Muslim, and I've been saying this sort of thing and much more for quite some time. But yeah, she's female and she's black, and she got elected, and that cuts both ways. Here, this was my article, of course, about her in the UNS review, which did pretty well. But the previous slide, I think we should go back to that, because there was this basically an attempt to lynch her in the West Virginia state capitol, which led to a brawl. And somebody was injured in a brawl in a state capitol, a brawl among state legislators for this poster somebody put up saying, "Never forget," over a picture of the World Trade Center and a picture of Ilhan Omar. And on Omar, the caption read, "I am the proof that you have forgotten." So the 9/11 genocidal anti-Muslim brainwashing operation is still paying dividends in some quarters, but not everybody buys it. In fact, some people actually get into a brawl.
I couldn't believe that. I mean, the passive aggression that generally goes on in the legislative chambers is so intense. To actually see somebody like physically injure another person, it's that things are being set on fire here. And also, I guess we're going to get to it later, but the attempt to censure her that went wildly south, I think that was pretty funny. I mean, just watching that whole thing unravel yesterday.
Yeah, this is actually having the effect of exposing the levers of power. And, you can see the man behind the curtain now. You couldn't before. It's pretty amazing. So, anyway, we can go through my UNS article that got a ton of reads and got noticed in the mainstream media a little bit, which sent even more reads over there. Of course, the more they attack you, the more publicity it is. And
they don't seem to understand that still. All these later, they don't get the Streisand effect at all.
Exactly. Yeah. Streisand effect is working. You're going to have to rename it the Omar effect, I think, pretty soon. And so here we have this generational fight is exposed. And, Helen, you're a little younger than me. I think you're probably a different generation. And it seems like the younger people are on the right side of this. On the right side here, we see, Chuck Schumer, Elliot Engel, or Gerald Nadler, those guys in the little blue starred hats, lynching Ilhan, which is pretty much what the old guard wants to do. And then we also have on the other side, everybody representing the future is more or less, coming out in defense of her, sometimes a little bit equivocally, but clearly there's this new generational divide. The young people are on the right side, and that's something I like to see.
Yeah, well, the young people grew up in basically their entire lifetimes. Israel was committing more and more crimes against humanity. And I don't know, the message was not shoved down their throats so fiercely, or it was assumed that they would support Israel just because everybody always had. Maybe they didn't get brainwashed as thoroughly. I don't know. I remember when I was in school, when I was younger, reading about occupied West Bank and how it's terrible that they're occupying Palestine and they shouldn't be there. Maybe my upbringing was unique in that, I don't know, I didn't go to public state schools, but I think that just the brainwashing has lapsed a little bit at some point in this generation's upbringing, and more truth was allowed to get in for whatever reason. I mean, in some ways,
through the internet.
Yeah, in some ways it was more intense, but that's also, people have had more exposure to real information. And also, they just haven't had enough time to accumulate the large sums of money that Schumer and his cohorts have through the Israeli lobby. I mean, when you've been paid by somebody for decades out of your life, you're much less likely to go against them than if you've just started getting paid by somebody.
Right. I don't know if these younger people are actually going to get very much money from AIPAC the way things are going. Ocasio-Cortez in the next slide we see is defending Ilhan Omar's remarks about Israel. She's not going to be getting those $1 million AIPAC checks. And then even Bernie Sanders in the next slide, bless his heart. I mean, he's, the way he's putting it is a little lame for my taste.
He only goes anywhere when it's really, really safe to do so. He's not a risk taker, that one.
But that's a good sign, though, because if it's safe enough for Bernie Sanders to jump on the Ilhan Omar bandwagon, I think we're actually making some progress here. Here he says, we must not equate anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the right-wing Netanyahu government in Israel. And I guess that's a safe position for Bernie to take. I think it misses some of the point, though. As I said in my Ron Unz article, Ilhan Omar's tropes are true. The unspeakable truth that's being exposed is not just that Netanyahu is a bad guy and the current government of Israel is bad. It's that the word Israel is basically a euphemism for the genocide of Palestine. That is, it's a settler colonial project, and it's a Jewish supremacist enterprise that's built into its very fabric. It isn't the problem of this or that government. The problem is Israel. The problem is Zionism. It shouldn't be there any more than French Algeria should still be there. French Algeria folded up and went home in 1960. And it's long since time that Zionist Israel needs to fold up and go home. And this is the reality that the younger people are starting to get and that the older people are terrified of.
Yeah, and also just the fact of the obscene power of the Israeli lobby to perpetrate this sort of falsehood that we have this special relationship and we need to always just support Israel, when we give them billions and billions of dollars and they turn around and use those billions of dollars to spy on people on college campuses, on people who are engaged in Palestinian justice activism groups. I mean, if anything else, I would hope that this whole Ilhan Omar kerfuffle is causing more people to go watch the lobby, that Al Jazeera special that was banned and now has leaked out and is percolating around. I mean, I really hope that people just follow that little rabbit hole, because that really says it all. I mean, you've got the money that our government is paying to Israel is then being weaponized and used against Americans who speak out against Israeli policies.
And they're admitting it. The AIPAC operatives are waving money around and saying, it's all about the Benjamins, baby. And they're saying it themselves. We don't need Ilhan Omar to say it.
Yeah, and then that's hypocrisy just pisses people off. I mean, that's the thing. More people are going to jump on that bandwagon for sure.
Indeed. And Nancy Pelosi is freaking out about this. I think she's really over the hill. It's time for her to step down and let some of this new young blood take over. Bernie's still hanging in there. I think Bernie has another 10 years in him, but I don't think Nancy does. She walked out of her meeting where the Democrats couldn't agree on trying to give a wrist slap to Ilhan Omar. She ended up slamming down her microphone and telling the attendees, well, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm done talking. Great. I hope you are done talking, Nancy.
If only it was that way for the rest of her legislative career. Oh, I'm just done talking. No, I mean, she's got early onset dementia or something. Just her way of phrasing things, it doesn't make any sense half the time. And so, yes, I think it's time for her to just, exit stage left and let somebody else take over. I mean, now some of the younger generation are a little more scary than others. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I thought was a complete fraud when she first appeared on the scene. The fact that she's sticking up for Ilhan Omar makes me kind of reconsider that, but I still, there's way too many red flags on her. I don't know.
What do you think are some of the red flags?
Well, the things that she tries to play off herself as this like ditzy, she doesn't really know that much. Well, she's got a degree in economics and foreign policy, and she went on MSNBC during the election and said something about occupied West Bank, and then the MSNBC host called her on it, and she immediately backtracked and said like, "Teehee, I don't really know actually anything about foreign policy. Teehee, I'm just a little girl." And it's like, wait, you have a degree in economics and foreign policy. You know what you're talking about. Why not just say that you know what you're talking about?
Well, but that lovable ditz image is great for her. Just like with Reagan. Reagan was a lovable, senile ditz, and she's a lovable, cute young female ditz. And I mean, people are going to vote for that, right?
That's true, but also the Green New Deal. I mean, her way of selling that is, we're going to work with the business interests who theoretically caused all these environmental problems in the first place. It's going to turn into basically Affordable Care Act Part 2. That's going to be a massive financial giveaway to corporations like Bechtel and Halliburton that are just going to be given all the contracts to build this infrastructure, which are going to keep the lion's share of the money for themselves, subcontract out. You're going to end up with, like, if the environment benefits at all, it's going to be by accident, and we're going to end up a lot poorer and with nothing to show for it.
Well, if she named it green fascism, which is what you're saying it sounds like it is, right? Corporations plus government equals fascism. That probably wouldn't sell as well as the Green New Deal.
No, fascism's brand has been irrevocably tarnished.
Well, and maybe it shouldn't have been, because as opposed to the New Deal, fascism got one thing right economically, which was the government should create the money supply, not the international bankers. And if we ever get that right, we're going to solve about 75% of our problems in one fell swoop. But that's another issue. So let's move on. And speaking, that issue, however, is so central, and I think it has something to do with the way the anti-Semitism trope is being used to bash anybody telling the truth about anything. Why? Because this issue of the financial control of the system, which isn't about Jews controlling the system, it's about money controlling the system. Maybe Jews happen to be somewhat overrepresented in the money, but the problem is the money. The problem is the plutocracy. And they use this anti-Semitism thing to keep us obeying our oligarchical masters. And over in Europe, we got a real display of that this week. You mentioned this earlier, Helen, about the efforts to make criticism of Zionism defined as anti-Semitism and criminalized. Here are 400 really French intellectuals. I guess they still have some French intellectuals left. I thought they were all gone. Shlomo Sand has a new book called The End of the French Intellectual, and I'm pretty much convinced by his argument. But here there are 400 who say, if you criminalize anti-Zionism, we're all going to be criminals. We're going to keep breaking that law. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that Macron realizes his days are numbered. I mean, what's his approval rating, like 20% right now? And so he's just basically, this was all supposed to be spread out over a period of many years, and slow incremental censorship and slow incremental creep towards fascism. But no, he's got to do it all right now, because he knows that he's not going to be around for much longer. I mean, I think if they set up a guillotine in the street, he'd be number one on the list. But it's just, I'm sure he
really has a reservation, front seat reservation, absolutely.
Yeah, no, just this idea that and he even said, well, we're not going to change any laws, but we're just going to tell all of the police and educators that now anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism because I say so. It's really, I mean, we'll talk about hubris. What a creep.
L'État, c'est moi, right?
Indeed.
The state,
indeed.
It is me. That's that was the famous last words of a French king at some point, and it might be Macron's too. And now they're not only trying to criminalize anti-Zionism, but they want to shut down the LFS. And who is it? It's CRIF, C-R-I-F. I forget what that stands for, but Committee to something about Israel, or commit Israel fraud or something. I don't know. The CRIF is the biggest Jewish Zionist group in France, and they want the yellow vests crushed. They are calling for zero tolerance. I mean, why do you think the yellow vests might get down on Jewish power when the Jewish power in France is the ones that are saying, shoot them in the face and blind them, shoot them with these rubber bullets right in the eyes and blind them all? I mean, this is, no wonder this guy is down on the Rothschilds.
Yeah, I mean, it's because they're going after the banks, they're going after the money power. And so, I mean, since almost the beginning, Macron has been trying to smear the whole movement as anti-Semitic, which is the whole point of coming up with this anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism thing. I mean, as I said in my article, basically this is being used as anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism equals let's shut it down, zero tolerance, etc. is just being used as just to get rid of these protesters, because they are largely responsible for the fact that Macron cannot find any supporters in his own country. I mean, his approval rating was going down before that, sure, but this really crystallized the opposition to him, and they have to get rid of them somehow, smearing them as haters and now saying haters must be deplatformed from social media forever. He wants to get rid of anonymity on the internet. You can't do that. I mean, you can, but it would really require a complete reinvention of the thing as a totalitarian, just nasty identity trap.
Yeah, you're gonna have to like come in and get fingerprinted and thumbprinted and biometric ID'd in order to get a driver's license to go on the internet.
He wants documents, identity documents from anyone opening a Facebook or Twitter account, which is insane. I mean, completely insane.
So if you want to use the internet, line up in front of your local police station so they can, book you and mugshot. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But any group apparently that really challenges the masters of the known universe, the oligarchs, the people who are really running things from their billion-dollar chateaus, like the Yellow Vests, is going to be banned, outlawed, zero tolerance will be applied. And Hezbollah is certainly one of those groups. Hezbollah is the dominant party in Lebanon. They basically are the most powerful force in the Lebanese government, but that didn't stop the UK from putting them on the list of terrorist groups, which is a complete fraud because Hezbollah does not systematically, intentionally target civilians, which is the definition of terrorism. The United States does. Israel does more than anybody else per capita. Hezbollah doesn't, and yet they're being called terrorists. So the UK here apparently has decided not only is the armed wing of Hezbollah terrorists, but its political wing, which is just a political party in Lebanon, the most important one, is also terrorist. Again, an example of the banksters trying to criminalize any opposition.
Well, Zionists are still smarting over Lebanon kicking their ass, however many years ago that was, and I mean Hezbollah kicking their ass rather, however many years ago that was. So yeah, I mean, got to silence all opposition by any means necessary. It also ties into this big myth about Iran being the #1 sponsor of terrorism. It's like, wait, don't look at Saudi Arabia over there. That's actually sponsoring all the terrorism. Iran hasn't invaded another country in how many hundreds of years?
No, but they've invaded the whole world with press TV, where people like me can go on and tell the truth.
Information war is worse than actual war. Yes, kill them with information.
I think that's why Iran is hated so much, because Iran's support for truth about the fact, #1, that everybody in the region says that so-called Israel is illegitimate, and the truth on a whole lot of other issues as well, is their main crime. And the people I've talked to in Iran, including some fairly high up, people, notable people, Nader Talebzadeh, Iran's biggest talk show host, they all know that if Iran just, surrendered on one issue, and that is Israel, suddenly Iran would be back in the good graces of the West. That's really what it's all about. And Iran keeps insisting on supporting the dispossessed, the Mustadafin people of the world, the Palestinians, the people in Latin America rising up against Yankee power. And of course, that makes Iran and its friends persona non grata. And so this truth that Iran is helping spread in various ways, that Hezbollah with its media arm in Lebanon is helping spread. Ultimately, they're going to label it as conspiracy theories, enemy propaganda. These are from Russian bots, those are from Iranian bots, and so on. And this war on conspiracy theories now is really pretty much like every week there are stories about this. And I thought the most amusing one this week was why the content moderators are falling for the conspiracy theories they're supposed to be censoring. Boy, I think the establishment is in trouble if they can't even hire anybody to try to ban conspiracy theories, because they all start believing them as soon as they look at them.
So that's the hazard of having humans do an algorithm's job. I mean, I covered this for RT a couple weeks ago when the original Verge article came out, and and of course they say, well, they talked to one guy who started believing 9/11 truth because he was supposed to censor 9/11 truth. And then they, of course, have to throw in flat Earth, because when you're talking about conspiracy theories and you talk about ones that happen to be true, you have to throw in flat Earth there to discredit them, because, we can all point and laugh at the flat Earthers. But talk about conspiracy theory, just going back to that Hezbollah slide there. I mean, Mike Pompeo thinks that Hezbollah is running the Maduro's government in in Venezuela. That's a conspiracy theory. That's one you should point and laugh at. But
that's a stupid conspiracy theory, as opposed to the many less stupid ones.
So they don't talk about the stupid ones, but the moderators are not doing their job because they're humans. I mean, humans, you expose them to the truth for long enough, will eventually get it. That's why we have to be kept away from it at all costs. That's the whole point of online censorship. But never send a human to do a bot's job, because they might actually end up working for the other side.
But they're going to try to find a solution. Apparently, Zuckerberg says that now they're going at Facebook, they're going to conduct a survey of the contractors' quote unquote resiliency. And that will help them better understand their workers' quote unquote mental health. And they're going to develop training manuals to prepare workers for the possibility that they will find themselves influenced by conspiracy theories. Oh my goodness.
Here's what to do when you read something that's true, that contradicts things you've been taught all your life. Don't believe it. Whatever you do, don't believe it. Yep. The things you were originally taught can't be wrong.
And the anti-vax conspiracy theories, of course, are at the top of the hate list. But I wanted to jump back here to the previous slide about Britain becoming the land of conspiracy theorists. Another wonderful conspiracy theories article. This one from the Rothschild-owned, or at least it was until recently, I think it still is pretty much Rothschild-influenced Economist magazine, with Brexit and the Yellow Jackets, or the Gilets jaunes, being the examples of the conspiracy theorists. So basically, populist movements where people stand up for the truth and for their own interests and for justice are conspiracy theory movements.
Of course, and it's not a conspiracy that, the Labour Party is completely infiltrated with anti-Semitism, so we have to just kick everybody out. And everybody who's ever expressed anything mildly critical of the money and power should just be, depersoned.
I mean, and listen to what these Rothschild butts tell us. Quote, a worrying number of people on the labor left are influenced by two conspiracy-charged tropes.
That word again.
That the Jews are overrepresented in international finance. Yeah, that's okay. And that the Israel lobby distorts British foreign policy.
You don't say. I mean, didn't Al Jazeera make a 4-hour documentary about that?
People who are open to these tropes tend to be open to other wild ideas. That the deep state is mobilizing to destroy Mr. Corbyn. That the capitalists are conspiring to immiserate the poor. And at the extremes, that the CIA planned 9/11 as an excuse to steal Arab oil. My goodness, what people might end up believing.
No, and it's been exposed. The Integrity Initiative, which is funded by the UK government, was set out to smear Corbyn. So that's not a conspiracy theory. That's in their own. That's in their own documents. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. If it's
people might end up believing the truth. We can't
have that. No, we have to just. Everything happens for a coincidence. It's that's why I say call them coincidence theorists.
It should have been written by Mr. Burns of The Simpsons, right? The Rothschild guy, cackling. We've got to stop the truth. Okay, moving on to the anti-vax conspiracy theories. Facebook is now at war with the anti-vax movements, removing algorithms that allow advertisers to find anti-vax audiences. They're taking down groups and pages and limiting their views and so on and so forth. And in the next slide, we see that Amazon is also removing anti-vax material. You can no longer watch Vaxxed at Amazon Prime. So I guess somebody's getting worried about this. So Helen, is this because they're honestly concerned about public health, or is this because they actually want to be shooting us up with stuff that who knows what kinds of effects it will have? Or is it really all just about making money for the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, it's largely about making money for the pharmaceutical industry, but it's also just once you've gotten to the point of legislating your side of the debate, it's because you've lost the debate. If the science was on their side, they wouldn't have to do this. And they know the science isn't on their side. They know that more and more people are questioning, maybe 30 vaccines before the age of 2 years old is not such a great idea because, children's immune systems aren't really built to handle all that. But not even going into the science, yes, it's about making money for the pharmaceutical industry. I don't know. I had a video that was kind of a joke title called "The Anti-Vaxxers are the New Holocaust Deniers," and it appears to be true. So
that's right. The next thing, they're going to have a vaccine against Holocaust denial, and every child is going to have to get it. And there'll be no religious exemptions, nothing like that.
No, the vaccine against conspiracy theory is that's what they're going to give to the people at Facebook's content moderation farms. And you can't change your mind. Once your mind has been set on a particular issue by the propaganda that you're fed in your indoctrination years, you can't change your mind. That's how it works.
So we're supposed to just trust these people who run the world because they're such wonderful people, right? Well, in our next slide, we had some interesting information about Jeffrey Epstein, the Mossad pedophile pimp who got blackmail material on all sorts of important Americans, probably including Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz, certainly, and many others. Here we have Dershowitz, the hideous lawyer, Harvard lawyer who was leading the charge to legalize torture in the U.S. by following Israel's example as the only country on earth that legalizes torture. It turns out that he liked to rape 13-year-olds with Epstein, and his lawyer was trying to keep all that stuff sealed. In the next slide, we have another article on this in the Daily Beast, and that's actually pretty good, breaking some new ground. And then finally, we actually have Ann Coulter talking about this and pointing out that this is only an issue because Alexander Acosta is Trump's attorney general. He was part of this cover-up, and this is a way of getting at Trump. When Bill Clinton was flying around with Jeffrey Epstein, nobody in the pro-Democrat mainstream media ever talked about it. So the friends of Jeffrey Epstein run the world, and we're supposed to trust everything they say.
Yeah, and also I think that the people who are writing about Alan Dershowitz being involved in this, unfortunately, now everybody who's read that article is going to have to imagine Alan Dershowitz naked, and that's just an image you can't get out of your head. However, yeah, I do think that
I want to unread that article quickly.
Yeah, really, it's not something you want to think about, and so that is a crime against humanity.
This whole thing's it's pretty horrific. Just this is how these billionaire playboys who run the world operate. Trump
and
got
the fact that there's nobody really knows about how Epstein ended up with all of this money and all of this influence and all of this impunity, basically, because he got away with trafficking dozens, if not hundreds, of girls, and basically swept under the rug, and so that he can be used to have compromising material on everybody else. I mean, they all say, it's the Russians that do this compromat thing, but it's everybody. I mean, every intelligence service does this, and Epstein is a central figure in the US/Mossad's version.
And people should look into the Franklin cover-up material. There's a book called The Franklin Scandal. I think that one's by Nick Bryant. And then there's The Franklin Cover-Up by John DeCamp, the Nebraska state legislator, who helped expose these kiddie trafficking rings that were taking children on midnight tours of the George H.W. Bush White House and the Reagan White House, actually, at that time, that were bringing a convicted pedophile pimp to sing the national anthem at the Republican National Convention. And if you study that material, you will learn that the people covering up for these elite pedophiles essentially control the Nebraska State Police, the FBI, the CIA, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. And that's all proven fact. That's not conspiracy speculation. If you're interested in this topic, take a look at the Conspiracy of Silence documentary, which is miraculously available. I think it's still on YouTube. They bought it and tried to destroy it, but one unlicensed copy showed up in John DeCamp's mailbox. So check it out, Conspiracy of Silence. These are the people that we're supposed to believe, we're supposed to trust, we're supposed to accept every word they say, and we're supposed to allow them to censor us and give us internet driving licenses and make sure that we only see what they want us to see.
Yeah, and so let's seal all the records and make sure nobody ever hears about it. I mean, there's some things you just can't sweep under the rug, unfortunately. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for them.
And speaking of child abuse, it isn't just the elite pedophiles, but we have the Afghan war. This is the Stars and Stripes, which is the second most read veterans publication in America. I write for Veterans Today, the most read veterans publication. Actually, Stars and Stripes might be more read in print because we don't have a print edition at Veterans Today. Anyway, the Stars and Stripes is admitting that they set a record in killing children last year. More than 3,800 civilian deaths happened last year due to American airstrikes, including about 930 children. So if this is what the Stars and Stripes is telling us, the reality must be even worse.
Yeah, and you wonder why Trump wants to end all of these reports about civilian deaths and about casualties, and basically because the truth is extremely unpleasant. And I know people who still defend Trump, saying, "Oh, well, those casualty reports, those numbers are fake. Where are they getting those numbers?" And no, actually, those numbers are severely underestimated. I mean, this is the Stars and Stripes. They have every reason to lowball the estimates and the amount of civilian casualties. Trump basically handed over authority to the military commanders to strike at whomever they please. They don't have to get authority to do it. Of course, they're going to shoot everybody. When all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail.
And this isn't really anti-Trump propaganda. In fact, Trump himself apparently would like to just get out of Afghanistan. If
Or
you
so he
read
says. I mean,
if you read Woodward's book Fear, it looks like Trump is just too much of a bloviating incompetent to just take things into his own hands and do what he wants to do. It looks like his advisors are leading him by the nose, disappearing signed orders from his desk so they never get implemented, and they're all against leaving Afghanistan. And Trump himself, it sounds like, has been relentlessly saying that he would like to just pull out of pretty much everywhere, including Afghanistan and even the Korean Peninsula, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's anti-Trump propaganda to point out that this Trump policy is killing children. I mean, this is our empire that's doing this.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately he'll make a statement like, "Oh, we're pulling out of Syria," and then all the people who should be cheering that on, the left, basically at one time anti-war left, just falls down on the job and starts shrieking about the Kurds. Who's going to protect the Kurds? Well, you didn't know who the Kurds were yesterday, dude. So like, I don't know. I mean, the sudden opportunism of the precious Kurds. I mean, I think that getting the U.S. out of Syria is rather more important than protecting people who, I mean, they can take care of themselves, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, especially if they would be willing to just live in the country that they're in rather than trying to bust it up into other countries. That usually does bring the hammer down on you, as David Koresh found out when he just tried to have a little bit of autonomy in a hole in the ground somewhere here in the United States. Well, on the next slide, we see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is speaking out against Afghanistan. And here's Fox News trying to imply that this is namby-pamby liberal stuff. She's so extreme in her liberal namby-pamby pacifism. She says the U.S. should have tried intervention after 9/11. And of course, the fact that she's not willing to stand up for 9/11 truth leads her open to these kinds of attacks. Because if you accept this premise that 19 and evil hijackers led by a guy in a cave in Afghanistan were able to blow up the World Trade Center, murder 3,000 people, hit the Pentagon, and so on and so forth, the normal American response, of course, is going to be to legitimate massive violence wherever the heck the leaders want it.
Yeah, but even if you believe that story, even if you believe that story, weren't all of the hijackers mostly Saudis? So why would you go into Afghanistan anyway? That doesn't make any sense. But the thing is that, of course, the idea that it's a liberal thing to not want to go into war in Afghanistan. There was a survey conducted at the end of last year that I think 73% of veterans think that it was a bad idea to go into Afghanistan in the first place. So the veterans are saying, no, this is bad, we need to get out, we're losing, this is a big mess. No, it's not liberal, it's human. Most humans in the United States think that we should get out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, and it's bipartisan. In the next slide, we see that Rand Paul and Tom Udall are sponsoring the bill, what's it called? The Afghan bill, which is American Forces Going Home After Noble Service Act. Noble service protecting the poppy fields for the drug lords, the CIA drug lords, I might add. So they're going to pay him a bonus and bring him home. Declare victory if you want. I guess we did achieve a mighty victory in Afghanistan. We restored the poppy industry.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, there was no opium industry there when we got there. The Taliban had ended it, and the first thing that the CIA did when they took over Afghanistan was reinstate the drug lords and tell them to plant away. And they've been setting world record crops ever since. So it was a success. We won the war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the world's biggest drug source for the CIA. We won. Let's get out.
Sounds good to me. And and Rand Paul was getting attacked after proposing this because I was looking, I wrote about it for RT. I was looking on his Twitter, and everybody's jumping on him for not backing Trump's emergency declaration. It's like, no, this guy just wants to pull us out of war, and you're talking about the border wall? No, this is more important. $6 trillion over the last 20 years has been poured into this black hole that is the quote unquote war on terror. And you're upset about not backing an emergency declaration, which is horrifically unconstitutional anyway. I mean, come on, guys, priorities.
Indeed. And anybody who wants to verify the fact that the CIA runs drugs, go ahead and watch that Hollywood film Kill the Messenger about Gary Webb, the journalist who proved it and then got 2 bullets in the head suicide as a result.
In the back of the head, yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to Kashmir and Pakistan, which is next to Afghanistan, of course, we have false flag operations being dissected. The whole Pakistani media is all over this, saying that this recent, Indian Kashmir bombing and Pulwama attack, this is all a big false flag to get Modi reelected. Here we have one article making that point, making the point that India has a long history of false flags. Elias Davidson's book, The Betrayal of India, goes into the Mumbai false flag operation terror attacks blamed on their Muslim Pakistani enemies, but actually carried out by the Indian government. RAW is their intelligence service in connection with the Israeli Mossad, probably, although Elias doesn't really go into that. In the next slide, we see another similar analysis of this event from the Pak Tribune. So the Pakistani media it gets this and talks about false flags. And in the next slide, we see that the satellite images are showing that not only was that suicide bombing probably a false flag to help reelect Modi, but this so-called response to it, where the Indians claimed they went and blew up a JEM religious school, it's BS. That there was no bombing there. Look at the satellite pictures. The school is still there, not a shred of damage. The trees are all around it. Everything's perfect. So apparently the Indians did exactly what the Pakistanis said, which is just dump some bombs over an uninhabited area and fly home in a re-election stunt for Modi.
Yep, they learn from the best. I mean, they're the #1 purchaser of Israeli weaponry, and so they've seen Netanyahu time and time again go into these sort of made-for-election wars in Gaza and get reelected. So Modi is doing the same. Have this terror attack, have this strong response, and he's going to get reelected. They learn from the best, basically.
So if you need to legitimate a war, you have to have a bad guy, a poster boy. You have to have some theatrical violence or alleged violence, an attack or a false flag attack. Moving over to Yemen, we have the UAE, which is Saudi's partner in crime in slaughtering the kids of Yemen, bringing Daesh or ISIS into Yemen. They imported Abu Bakr al-Zaghri, who's a Daesh leader from Iraq, to Yemen, set him up, and now they're massacring non-ISIS clerics.
With the help of U.S. mercenaries.
Right, and they're doing this with U.S. and European arms, as we see in the next story. Al Jazeera just reports that, well, so far 85,000 children have been killed in this war on Yemen, most of them by Saudi bombings and deprivation caused by Saudi bombings. And the Saudis are using planes and weapons furnished by the United States and its allies. Now,
they're also using mercenaries from the U.S. That last slide there, the UAE bringing ISIS to kill clerics. There was a big report not that long ago that there was a bunch of former U.S. military, Green Berets and whatnot, going in, had been hired as mercenaries to do basically this extra legal attack force by UAE to kill Yemeni clerics. So, I mean, I guess that story kind of went nowhere, but the guy did come out and say that, yeah, we were doing this and we did this for years and we killed a couple dozen of them. So, yeah, it wasn't just ISIS. And it's not just U.S. arms; it's also U.S. mercenaries.
So, do you think Congress will actually stand up and end this? You know, Congress seems to be growing a little bit more of a backbone now. They've done some votes against the war in Yemen. They have this new bill against the war in Afghanistan. U.S. Congress may take back its war-making power because of these insane, atrocious wars that have no benefit to U.S. national security. How fast do you think that's going to happen?
Oh, I really, really hope it happens, but I don't see it happening. I mean, there are so many ways that they can just tank these things. Every Yemen resolution ends up having like a poison pill inserted into it. Like that last one was that virtue signaling edition on anti-Semitism, which of course doesn't belong in a bill to end the war in Yemen, but they put it in there anyway so that you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You vote against the anti-Semitism resolution, you look soft on anti-Semitism. You vote for it, you end up tanking the Yemen bill. So basically they're forcing Democrats to choose between ending the war in Yemen and condemning anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, Democrats don't really have the principles to back ending the war on Yemen. It's too bad because it's really the most unconscionable war out of a lot of unconscionable wars that the U.S. is in right now. But I don't think they're going to do it. I really hope I'm wrong, but generally one cannot underestimate the just sort of venality of the American politicians.
But Helen, didn't the Republicans insert that anti-Semitism condemnation stuff into the Yemen bill as a way to try to embarrass the Democrats over these Ilhan Omar kerfluffles?
No, that was before, actually. It was before.
Oh, it was before. Okay. But still, they were just trying to embarrass the Democrats. But the Democrats didn't really have anything to lose. They just went ahead and voted for the bill to end the war on Yemen anyway, even though it included a passage condemning anti-Semitism. And the Democrats' attitude, of course, was, well, of course we condemn anti-Semitism. What, you think you're going to get us to vote differently on this? So they went ahead and passed that bill, right?
Yeah, well, they tried, and then the Senate, they declared it, there was a parliamentary procedure. They declared that the anti-Semitism amendment had nothing to do with the the content of the bill in general. And so it had to go back and have the amendment removed. And now they have to do a vote all over again. And somebody is going to propose that amendment all over again. Basically, they ensnare these things in procedures so they never actually get passed, which is why
I see.
I mean, there's a will to pass it. Yeah,
okay,
it was a weird little procedural maneuvering, but that's what happened. And I think they're trying to redo the process right now, but there's nothing to stop the Republicans from just introducing that amendment all over again and going through the same process. And we'll be very lucky if it ever gets passed. Let's put it that way.
So basically, condemnation of anti-Semitism is a perfect poison pill for any bill that you don't want passed, even if it's going to pass unanimously. You say, okay, we're adding this, anti-Semitism condemnation. You don't like anti-Semitism, do you? Okay, you can't stop me from putting this in your bill. And now we're going to vote for the bill. You have to vote against anti-Semitism, right? So now you vote for the bill, but the bill goes nowhere because the bill is now been poison pilled. So
yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, nothing is ever going to get done. But obviously, they don't whip this out for every single bill. But it's to be whipped out once in a very special occasion. No, anti-Semitism is just basically becomes rhetorical cudgel for anything you disagree with. Just like whip out the anti-Semitism and start beating your opponent to death with it.
Yeah. Well, that's how the establishment runs the world. Is anybody who gets out of line and makes any critique of anything, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with Jews or Israel or anything else, beat them on the head with anti-Semitism. Oh boy.
Even if it's completely inapplicable. I mean, condemning the entire Labour Party as anti-Semitic because what, you're afraid of Corbyn or something? I mean, and that book that was supposed to be a big hit job on him that just ended up painting him as a kind of a nice, mild guy. Like, come on, you could do better than that.
And of course, we can't blame Zionism for everything, but we can blame it for quite a lot of things, including the war on 7 countries in 5 years, the attempt to destroy 7 countries in 5 years, which General Clark told us was apparently the real purpose of 9/11. And one of those countries was Sudan. And it looks like that country is now on the list. Well, they busted it up and destroyed it. They succeeded in breaking off the resource-rich South and destroying the nation of Sudan, which had been the biggest African country and the biggest Arab country. And now it's a basket case. And now Israel is putting its man in power. A Sudanese intelligence chief, Saleh Ghosh, held secret talks with the head of the Mossad as part of a plot by Israel's Gulf allies to put this Ghosh in the presidency when Omar al-Bashir is toppled. So the Saudis, Emiratis, and Egyptians are carrying water for the Zionists, helping turn Sudan into a Zionist province, I guess.
Yeah, it's just the vultures picking over it. I mean, the Saudis are using Sudanese child mercenaries to fight their war in Yemen too, basically picking them up by the bucketful and transporting them over to Yemen, where they get paid peanuts to go and kill children. And so yeah, children killing children. Great job. You have the moral high ground there, guys. Disgusting.
And we should point out that Israel greatly benefited from splitting Sudan in half because Israel has a huge presence in South Sudan, where they were able to break off that resource-rich region, and Israelis are profiting disproportionately there, as there in so many other places where horrible things are happening. Well, moving into an area where you can't completely blame the Israelis, and that is off the coast of China. The Philippines are saying, we're not begging the Americans to come defend us against China. It's the Americans who want to get into a war with China, not us. That's pretty interesting because the whole excuse for the U.S. being there is to supposedly defend the Philippines. So who's defending what here, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, it's really telling how much of a pariah the U.S. has become around the world. I mean, Duterte is a fascinating figure just because his sort of like, he'll cozy up to the U.S. about some things and then not just be completely uninterested. I mean, he's his own person, which is very rare in the world these days. But yeah, if the country that you've sworn to defend doesn't want your help, then maybe, it's time to reconsider your means of quote unquote diplomacy. I think that this is a good move on the Philippines part because, yeah, this can so easily be used to trigger an international provocation. They're itching to get into a war with China that doesn't actually affect them, and that the only way to do that would be to keep it over there, keep it closely contained, and find some reason to slap sanctions on China or whatever, which would be the most suicidal idea in the history of the world. But they love them some suicidal ideas. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, this was the Defense Secretary, Delphine Lorenzana, who made this statement, basically saying, we don't want a war. It's those Americans who want a war. And it's the Americans who are likely to stumble into a shooting war with Beijing. Why would that be? Well, in the next slide, we see that China's economic power is spreading worldwide, even into the European G7 US-occupied region. Italy, of course, is contested province of the American empire, and it's now joining the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, as the first G7 nation. So
yeah, Italy had better watch out.
Is this the beginning of the end for the U.S. empire?
I think so. I mean, Italy especially better watch out. They're gonna get some surprise terrorism pretty soon, because weren't they also the one in the EU that didn't allow them to pass the resolution declaring Guaido president of Venezuela? I thought they were the one holdout, I think. So this is two strikes against them. They're going to end up with some terrorism soon, I bet.
Yeah, Italy's an interesting country. You know, it's always been a little more free thinking than most of the other European countries for whatever reason. So a little shout out to them. It's pretty impressive to see them doing this. How about the underlying issue, though, Helen, the economic war between these empires, rising China, whose economy, by some measures, is already surpassing the U.S. economy. By the official measures, not quite yet. U.S. trade gap is now at an all-time high of $419.2 billion, up from last year's $375 billion. So Trump's wonderful negotiating prowess apparently hasn't paid off in any reduction of this U.S. deficit with China. On the contrary, the deficit is still skyrocketing. And ultimately, I think it's these financial factors that determine geopolitical power. U.S. seems to be heading down. China seems to be going up.
Well, it's just that China is making friends with money, and the U.S. has historically made its friends and allies by threatening them and bombing them and threatening to bomb them. And China is just, we'll build your infrastructure project. We'll build you a nice bridge. We'll build you some canals. And obviously, that's the much more civilized way to do it. And the U.S. cannot stand that they have been shown to have the inferior way. So, yeah, also expecting Trump to be like the great negotiator, the great businessman when his casinos largely went bankrupt.
U.S. says, we'll build you some military bases, we'll occupy them. We'll build you some brothels. This is the kind of thing.
We'll build you a mine and take all the natural resources out, because you can't be trusted to handle them yourself. Yeah.
Well, we'll see how that all works out with China. China seems to be better at building infrastructure, because with a centrally planned economy, and specifically with centrally controlled government-run banks creating the money supply interest-free, they're not paying interest to billionaire Zionist oligarchs like we are. We have a private banking system that causes us to be losing about 1/3 of all of our value in interest to the banksters who create our money supply. China creates its own money supply. And just like how Germany was able to have an economic miracle in the early 1930s because it started printing its own money supply, that's what China does. And so China can direct its money to infrastructure projects, and hence they have fantastic high-speed rail. They're in 5G long before we ever will be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they can do this Belt and Road thing by offering these productive projects to others all around the world. I recently interviewed Andrei Volchek and John Cobb, who were the authors of Chinese, China's ecological imperialism. That's Alfred McCoy. Alfred, what's his name who wrote that? No, ecological civilization, pointing out that the concept of ecological civilization has taken root in China, and they're using this state-created money to green up China. It used to be the world's most polluted country just less than a decade ago, and now it's by far the world's most rapidly improving country. So the secret to being able to make things better is to print your own money, not have the banksters create money out of nothing by lending it into existence at interest, and then it all has to be paid back to those banksters. This is so central and so obvious. I really think this is the issue maybe that we should all be concentrating on.
No, I would agree, because I mean, China just unilaterally decided, okay, we're going to plant enough trees to cover the area of Ireland now, and they set their military to work planting trees, and they're doing it. And the same thing with these big infrastructure projects. I mean, the U.S., you can't get an infrastructure project because, as I said earlier, it's you give it to the big contractors, they subcontract it out to the next guy and next guy and next guy, and everybody keeps a little bit of money along the way, and you end up with some shoddy, cheap, crappy infrastructure. And in China, they don't do that because it's top down, and as much as that might be an authoritarian system, there are some things that you do want a central authority controlling. Infrastructure would be one of them. I mean, obviously not their way of surveilling people. No, not so much. But I think you can have authoritarian on the infrastructure side and not on the information flow side. I think that's entirely possible, and I think that's something that we should pursue. Yeah,
just think what the U.S. could do. If we actually enforced our Bill of Rights and we had public money, we could actually be doing pretty well over here. But we're not. And the Chinese, at least, they're working for stability, maybe a little too much stability ideologically sometimes. In Korea, though, it's probably a good thing to try to keep some stability. Korea, I mean, why is the U.S. the one saying that, if you guys have nuclear weapons, we're going to come and kill millions of people? Why? So many countries have nuclear weapons. North Korea isn't going to use its nuclear weapons to do anything other than deter an American invasion. So, I mean, they're a de facto nuclear weapon state. They're not going to give it up. All of this nonsense about Trump being the world's greatest negotiator is not going to make any difference.
Yeah, and Trump is turning around and trying to sell nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry. I mean, this is completely insane. Yeah, and bloviating about how, if Iran has nuclear power, it's the end of the world. Oh, we're just going to sell our nuclear weapons to the actual biggest state sponsor of terrorism. That's a great idea. What could go wrong?
You should probably be selling nuclear weapons to Juan Guaido, the self-appointed so-called president of Venezuela, because that's the only way you could really get anybody to believe that he's really president. As we see in our war in Venezuela section, which is in our next slide.
He was such a joke. I mean, nobody is falling for it. It's what 50 out of 190 countries that are in the UN are the ones that are supporting him, and the US is framing it like, oh, all of the world except for Russia and China supports Guaido. No, all the world thinks that he's a pretender and a moron. Like, especially
since this false flag fell through. We knew there was some kind of false flag supposed to be happening at the border, and it all just fizzled out. You wrote about this beautifully in your article on the Sorcerer's Apprentice effect. 200 soldiers led by retired General Clivier Alcala. They've been in Colombia for ages, and so they're trying to invade Venezuela with some aid as their excuse. And then they chickened out at the last moment, so it never happened. So the false flag never went off, and so everybody's wondering, what was this all about?
Yeah, pretty funny. So, I mean, I'd like to see that. And even Brazil, even like quasi-fascist Brazil, will not let the U.S. use it as a staging ground for an invasion. Which is, I mean, the Lima Group, which was formed specifically to delegitimize Maduro's government, will not support the military invasion by the U.S. So they're getting really pissed. And I've heard from sources that they are massing soldiers in Puerto Rico. They're preparing for an invasion, but it's like, from where? What are you going to do? Just land a bunch of boats? I think they'll be able to get rid of you pretty quickly. But
these regime change operations are starting to fail. Syria and now Venezuela. I wonder how long the empire can continue to accept these kinds of losses. Well, let's move on to the Trump world category. We got a poll showing that 64% of Americans believe that Trump committed crimes before taking office. The other 36% aren't paying attention. Well, of course he did. Of course, most of the other politicians at that level perhaps did as well. But Trump definitely is a little ahead of the game in terms of his organized crime connections. Speaking of Trump world, in the next slide, we have The Guardian talking about the neo-Nazi plot against America. Inspired by Trump, the right-wing extremists are coming. Christopher Hessen, U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant, is dreaming of whipping up a bio plague to kill everybody off. He took no steps to do that.
Dreaming. A lot of people are dreaming about things. I mean, a lot of people are dreaming about being a unicorn and spreading rainbows and sweetness everywhere. But we don't talk about that. I mean, this whole like neo-Nazi panic. I thought that they had abandoned this after it failed to really galvanize the populace after Trump got elected. I mean, we were told that there were neo-Nazis lying in wait behind every corner, waiting to bash minorities, and then it turned out that like every single hate crime was a hoax. So I mean, yeah, and like swastikas being spray painted backwards and stuff. This stuff is a joke. Why are they bringing it up again now?
In this headline, the neo-Nazi plot against America echoes the very interesting book by Philip Roth, The Plot Against America, which imagines Charles Lindbergh leading an isolationist pro-Nazi group into power in the U.S. in the 1930s. And the protagonist is a young Jewish boy who suddenly finds himself in a very unfriendly country. It's a very interesting book. It came out right after 9/11. I think it's a roman à clef about 9/11. And the real plot against America that Roth knows happened was the Zionist plot against America on 9/11, which is specifically designed to make sure that America is the kind of place that young Jewish protagonist in his book will find friendly. In any case, people might want to check out that book. But speaking of neo-Nazi plots against America, how about the Covington kids, Covington High School in Kentucky? Nick Sandmann, these goose-stumping pro-Trump kids with their MAGA hats are definitely a threat to the republic.
No, this one's
they're the ones who are getting in the faces of nice old Native American men and getting death threats about it. It turns out the Washington Post says it's right. You actually Are we allowed to admit that you wrote this story?
I wrote this article. Yeah. So basically, the Washington Post they realized that this is a serious lawsuit, $250 million against the Washington Post for spreading this fake story that these kids menaced this native elder, this native elder who also claimed he was a Vietnam vet who he wasn't. And Washington Post printed this as truth, didn't retract it. They wrote stories later that sort of like semi walked it back, but not really. They never claimed the original story was false, which is the problem here. And the suit is alleging defamation, which is very true. The kids got death threats. Kids were told they were their school was gonna be burned down. They were doxxed. Their parents were doxxed. The administration first jumped on the bandwagon of attacking them before they realized that there was a full video that actually showed what had really happened. And basically, yeah, this more than anything else, at least up until the Jussie Smollett thing, has discredited the mainstream media as being just completely unwilling to do their research. I mean, the fact checking used to be a thing. Wasn't after the 2016 election, we were told that fact checking was going to be all important and the media was really going to be responsible and do their.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it the alternative media that actually fact checked this and got it right?
Yep. Yeah, the guys that you're not supposed to believe because they're all Russian trolls and Russian bots and Iranian bots and Venezuelan bots too. Now I forgot about the Venezuelan bots. It's funny how only the countries that are our quote unquote enemies have the bots.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling. Well, maybe they'll have to perfect their censorship algorithms to make sure that nobody is able to put the full video of events like this onto the internet, because this is leading to great, social instability. Not to mention a $200 million lawsuit against Bezos and the Washington Post.
It was 250, which I like because it's the same price that Bezos paid for the Washington Post. So there's some poetic justice there. I mean, he's going to have to pay for the Post all over again.
I think that's a symbolic number, just like when people donate $19.48 to Ilhan Omar, which I urge everybody to do. Everybody should give her $19.48. Of course, the 1948 Nakba, or Palestinian Holocaust, being the message there. Well, the good guys sometimes win, and I guess the moose in Canada is winning. We love to do a stupid Canada story, at least one Canada story, maybe a smart one, every week, just to keep Tony Hall happy. Tony Hall and Greg Felton, our co-hosts, who happen to be from Canada. So here we have Canada winning the battle of the mooses, whatever the plural is.
Big old moose.
Yeah, it is. Right. Well, they're both pretty big old. The Norway moose and the Canada moose were both about 32 feet tall, but the Norway moose was a little bit taller. They had a big fight. The moose jaw Canada moose is winning because they're giving that moose prosthetic antler enhancement. So he has a bigger antler than the other moose, like Trump and Kim. So there you go.
Moose doping. They're going to get hauled in by the international regulatory agencies.
So you think Trump and Kim could get over their dispute with some prosthetic enhancement? I don't know. Anyway,
I don't even want to think about that.
Let's not even go there. Let's go away and come back next week. Well, thank you so much, Helen Bajniski. It's been really fun doing False Flag Weekly News with you. And where can people find your work?
HelenofDestroy.com is my website. I also have a YouTube channel, Helen of Destroy, and medium.com/Helen.Bajniski, Buyniski.
And your work has been known to grace the web pages of all sorts of major outlets, including RT. So keep up the great work. Looking forward to seeing you again. We'll have to bring you back. So until next week, thank you to all of our viewers and supporters. We really appreciate it. We're going to be in much better shape next week with fancy production equipment, high production values. So you just wait. We're going to try and go live on Facebook and Twitter and all of that. We're hoping Ellen will have that ready for us. So again, thank you for that fundraising success. See you all next time.